All right, so let's get started. So just to recap on part 3, and maybe we bring up part 3, that would be useful. Obviously, this is for graphics 2, part 3 of our project. So graphics 2, summer, assignments, and... oh man, I got 2 part 3s. There we go. All right, so taking a look at it, just in case you didn't get this that day, I do have some extra copies if you do want a physical copy. However, it is also uploaded on Canvas, so you're more than welcome to it. However, upon last time discussing, essentially we need all the floor plans. We need 1 section, 1 elevation, and 1 2-point perspective. To be fair, most of us probably have a good amount of this, right? Some of us jumped into the elevation. Wonderful. You could use it, you could Photoshop it, and of course put it on the final composition. Or you can simply trace it, now knowing the skills that you do have, and you can make corrections, changes, by all means. But I do want to get you started in at least trying to make this, right? For some of us, we already know how to model, right? So that could be an option too. However, keep in mind, I'm not going to show you how to model in Graphics 2. That's what we do in computer graphics with myself, Professor Amin, or even Professor Tunks, right? Where we go from modeling to 2-dimensional. Keep in mind, we're just using this for the 2-dimensionalities that it has, right? That are most often actually skipped all the time in computer graphics. We go right into the 3D rather than really focusing on the incredibleness of 2-dimensional drawing. But in our case, we are in week 8, working in a computer lab, and I'm still going to stick to this. However, you can definitely scratch out exercise 6 do, because that is the one that we are skipping, right? And of course allowing more time for not only the previous project, but of course now part 3. In our case though, I do want to see floor plans and your sections by this Thursday, right? Printed, right? So that either means I retrace them or I scanned in my original ones from part 2 and cleaned them up a little bit on Photoshop in order to reprint them and possibly even fix them if there are any errors. In my case, next week is kind of more or less the last week. I mean, let's face it, it's really the last work week, whereas by week 10, we're essentially turning this in on Tuesday. That's right, Tuesday, not Wednesday, not Thursday, because you'll need to be working on your last studio project, right? So the entire idea is to actually be done with this first, that way it leaves open the door for studio. So anyway, just in case you needed to be caught up in that regard. But let's just get right to it and go over basically how to draw them. So the first thing that I do want to go over is essentially tracing. And as you can see in the background, I have actually the assignment 6 that we were going to work on. So I'll just put that somewhere else for now. Get out of here. Get out of here. There we go. All of it. There we go. Nice and fresh. So in my case, I was mentioning to you guys, one of the first things that we could do is literally trace something. So you can just literally take in a picture. And some of us are probably even already familiar with this as well. But you can type in picture, bring in a picture, or you can type in import. Really doesn't matter. Both of those will essentially do the same thing. If I wanted to import a 3-dimensional model, I'd have to use import. But we're just putting in a picture today. So I'll type in picture, enter, and it'll essentially ask for that picture. I'll go to downloads, and you'll immediately notice that PDFs do not work. That's because a PDF isn't actually a picture. It's not an image file. In fact, it's a vector file. You'll know that Illustrator, you love Illustrator because it has these vector lines and they're very crisp and very clear. Whereas in Photoshop, they're a rasterized program and they're technically an image. They're pixelated. They've got a certain amount of pixels in the width and a certain amount of pixels in the height. That is not true of a PDF. In fact, it's a true scale drawing, and it's of course a vector drawing. So you'll notice right away that PDFs don't go in. However, screenshots of PDFs do. So we'll take the screenshot of what we have. So in my case, I am going to be using Ethan's that he turned in last time. Well done. Can't say it's the best scan in the world, so I don't know. I don't know if I want to necessarily use that for my final project. After all, I mean, knowing what I know now, this could be a simple trace job. For instance, the fact that some of these things are actually repeating, right? So for instance, I may actually only have to draw one of these and copy it. right? Because I can. Now, in our case, I do want to start to kind of set that up for you. And, well, you might have done this too, where you have it all on one image, and that's totally fine. But, I don't know, I'm pretty OCD about things, and I like things to be incredibly too much in order. So very often, I'll separate my drawings, right? So for something like this, I'll take all three, trim, and essentially get rid of the background. I don't know, I'm just not a fan of background item things. As you can see, it's still kind of attached, so you still do have to kind of remove it. And if it didn't trim, well, in my case, I had 2 lines on the same piece, so do make sure you don't do that. So let's take my curve, make it slightly smaller. That way when it actually trims the image. No, not that one. It's okay. You can't really mess up, right? You can always do Command Z. But yeah, once you trim it out, what's nice is they are separate drawings now. So of course there's that. But one of the first things I want to do is actually get this to the correct scale. And I don't know if I necessarily went over this. In fact, I do this so many times that it's hard to actually remember exactly what I said for each one. And sometimes I do watch the videos, of course, to remind myself. But in our case, the best way to do it first is to type in units. That controls the units of this document. Now, you'll notice the one that I gave you is already to feet or already to inches, but it is never a bad idea to double take and make sure. Now, one of the general rules of digital technology is when we make a model or we make a drawing, we don't draw it to scale. We draw it 1-to-1. We draw it as if it was a true object, if it was a true scale. So you definitely want to do that because, I don't know about you, but definitely in studio, you could have a studio professor who goes, okay, I want to see it at 1/4 scale. I want to see it at 1/8 scale. I want to see it at 1-to-20. I want to see it at 1-to-40. And it doesn't make sense drawing that 4 different times, but to rather use the exact same model and of course size it to the scale that you need. We'll go over that as well. But in our case, I want to make sure that it's in feet because this true object is in feet and it's a pretty tall one. So it is in feet and we're good there. So the next thing I want to verify is some sort of dimension. Now, this is of course just for tutorial. Ethan definitely probably knows his dimensions and you probably know the dimensions of your stuff better than anybody else, but we'll have to fake it till we make it, at least for today. So in my case, I'm going to draw a line. And I know that this is of course should be 1 foot by 6 inches. So we're essentially going to pick a point, type in 12 inches, and enter. That's 12 inches. So right away, does my image need to get smaller or bigger? Definitely, right? The image is way too large compared to this true scale line, right? So one of the first things I want to do is take my base point and line it up to one of them, right? We'll choose this one, and that one's looking pretty sweet. Fake it till we make it. See kind of a crosshair going on in there. I want to take all 3 just because, well, I don't want to do this over and over again, right? And there's that line. Now, I should probably change the color so you can see it a little bit better, but it should be okay, at least in the recording. Now, in my take, I'll type in scale. It's going to ask for a base point. I'm pretty sure we covered this last time. It's going to ask for the reference point, which is asking, hey, what part of this image do you want to be 12 inches? In my case, I'm going to hold shift to make sure that it's orthogonal and select my reference point. Click. And now it's going to go, hey, now where do you want it? Well, I want it to, of course, equal 12 inches. So I don't need the midpoint, but of course the end point. So now this length is the length inside the drawing. So if I type in length, in fact in the bottom corner, it'll even say 1 foot, right? Of course, giving us what that is. Now sweet, now it's to true scale. Now what? Yes, sir. I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you said something because that was the next thing I wanted to do. Now, he brings up a good point. Ethan said, the drawing is slightly off. Oh man, I can't use it now, can I? No, of course you can. We'll just rotate it, right? And we'll rotate it very specifically because it might not be a perfect degree. It might not be exactly 3 degrees. It might be 3.356827. You know, I mean, it could be something quite ridiculous. So in our case, I'll draw a straight line because I know that'll be a perfectly straight line. In my case, we'll go right here. Hold shift. If I don't hold shift, I can do whatever, but if I do hold shift, of course, it remains orthogonal. Now in my case, there's a nice straight line, and I can immediately see just how off it is. Now I'll take this piece, and in my case, since it came from the same drawing, We'll take all three, rotate. We'll select our base point, and we'll select the other reference point. In my case, it'll be that slightly off one. So in my case here, click, and of course rotate it until we hit perfectly. Right? Not too shabby. Right? I don't have to start over the entire drawing. I don't have to go back to the drafting table or anything of the sort. But as you can imagine, one of the things that I do want to go over today is setting up your 2-point perspective. So before we get there, obviously tracing this would be proficient, right? Because some of these things may be off, they may be right on, I don't know, or maybe I didn't use the right line weight, and I don't necessarily want to or have time to go back to the drafting table and do it necessarily again, scan it again, and put it back into Photoshop again, right? So don't get me wrong, you may be in this very boat. What I'm trying to say is you can keep your analog or you can decide to scratch it. It's up to you, right? So either way, you got to scan it if you want to use it, or you may want to scan it just so that you can trace it, right? So either one is fine, or you could just have it next to you too. You don't necessarily need to scan it if you're just going to trace it, I guess, or put it in, right? Is typically what we say. In my case though, since we have it scaled and we have it rotated, might as well get into it. Obviously we have the top view and some of the side views, so or the section views. In my case, I could set that up as if it was my 2-point perspective, right? I could get my top floor at the top, I could even get the rotation going on, and you can imagine that we're almost having the digital drafting table right now, but let's draft this part first, right? Because there are some excellent things that we can do. The first one is, well, I don't want to accidentally select my image, so I can type in lock. When I type in lock, no matter what you do, it will not move. Now, what stinks about that is if you open this file up 2 years later and you're like, man, why isn't this stuff moving? And you forgot about when you locked, right? So when in doubt, you can type in unlock and of course unlock something. However, there's no visual cue in terms of what's getting locked or what's not locked, so be careful with that. Another thing that is kind of nice and that I would definitely encourage more is to actually take these layers in your layer, actually make a photos layer. That way there's just absolutely no question, and let's face it, if it's a team project, then well, now I can share it and they'll know what I'm doing as well. But I can also turn off or lock these completely. That way nothing can of course move. Next, let's go with the trace layer. Right? Why not? I could be super specific and say trace section. I mean, we could really get into the thick of it, and number 1, we could change the color just so it's easier to see, and I think I will today. Orange is actually kind of hard to see on the projectors. Let's go with green. Green's pretty easy to see. But in my case, you can imagine I could do this line by line, so I could type in line, start off with my base point, right? Could hold shift, and I could really kind of fake it till I make it. I don't necessarily need to know the dimensions of these things, and this is what I meant by like tracing it, right? As you can see, I'm kind of making like construction lines right now, right? So for instance, I can copy this one, be like, oh man, I'm gonna need one here, I'm gonna need one there, 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 and you see what I'm saying? I'm kind of faking it till I make it, but I'm also using my piece. Don't get me wrong, this is not the best or most accurate way to do something on a computer, but boy is it fast, right? And what I mean by not accurate is, well, if I hit DIM, which is dimension, and I go in between 2 spots, say this one and that one, it's going to give me a certain dimension, sure. And that dimension may be correct in millimeters. But if I say take this one, I'm going to get something very, very different. In fact, well, let me not confuse you in millimeters. We'll go to lengths, and of course switch that to feet and inches. Yeah, so 4 feet 2. I doubt this one is also 4 feet 2. I bet it's close. Nope. Length units. And it's always switching spots on me. There we go. Yeah, not exactly. Even though that's supposed to be roughly the same. So don't get me wrong, there's a couple ways to do this. You could fake it till you make it, or you could do it the exact way. So for instance, get out of here. We could just draw it. So for instance, I could take a regular polyline, take a known point, I can type in 6 inches, enter, shift, 12 inches, enter, shift, 6 inches, so on and so forth. I could do it that way, or I could realize that I have repeating elements, and well, another thing is, this is kind of hard to look at. So let's take this image and give it some transparency. Oh yeah, and there you go. My point exactly. You'll sit there forever. Did I lock it both ways? My bad. Yeah, I did. There we go. So we can take this image, we'll go to properties. I think I've explained this one actually. You can go to the material tube, of course give it some transparency, especially if it's getting hard to see. And let's make that actually a lot easier to see by switching it to green. Again, this is for the sake of tutorial, but in my case, I could just take this piece, copy it all day long. Now, this is where it starts to get weird and you start to realize, wait a minute, my drawing's not exactly correct, right? Because, well, drafting is only so correct. And to be fair, it does look pretty correct from even the view of how far away we're typically from our drawings. But when you start to get microscopic view and you start to look at your drawings this close, you start to realize some things, that your drawing skills just, you actually see what it is to be human, at least in one person's opinion. But what is nice about this is that it's true scale. That's exactly correct, right? In my case, I can continue that and just finish it, right? I can go exactly 3 feet, and we get some dimensions that are trying to help me out a little bit. My guess is that we're about 1 inch off there, which, by the way, is like minuscule on the drafting table, right? I mean, it would be maybe even unnoticed. Especially my eyes. But in my case, I'm going to go with 3 feet, enter. I'm going to draw the correct one. Fake it till I make it, and keep going. So it might be a hodgepodge between them, is what I'm trying to say. But what's not nice about this, I can take this line, this one, all of them actually. Well, let's lock the photos real quick again, otherwise I'm going to move all those around. But I can take that piece that I just drew, join it, and it'll turn it all into one line. Sweet. I could take a copy of that, or I could move that one since it's slightly off. Type in move. I could fix it if I want to. But of course I could take the exact same piece and realize that there's repeating elements. I can hold shift and I can make sure they're perfect. In fact, I can even take one, mirror it, MIR, flip it, and get rid of that one. So, I wouldn't sell yourself short. I wouldn't also settle for terrible drawings either, right? So it's really entirely up to you. I would say even Ethan's could probably use a retracing, right? But it really does depend how you want to go about it. Do you want to have the construction lines in there? Again, now knowing what you know with with this unique tool, there's a lot more we can do now, and arguably just as human. But as you can see, I can already save myself a lot of time by simply realizing that I have repeating elements. Last but not least, we can keep going, finish the rest of the drawing. Polyline tool is probably my favorite, but easily you could get some rectangles involved too. Simply trim those out. So this is definitely what I meant, at least when some of you guys said, can we really trace? Yes, and well, it depends how good you are at drawing, right? Because, well, you can't just magically trace something that's going to make the drawing better, right? You either have to draw it correctly or trace something accurate, right? If that makes sense. But hopefully, for the most part, pretty intuitive, right? As soon as I turn off the images, now I do have something to work with, right? Now I can take essentially this drawing, trim it up, TRIM, and of course get rid of things that I don't need. So for instance, maybe some of these elements that are locked away in my item. But I don't know about you, I could do this one-handed, whereas my drafting table, not so much. Now don't get me wrong, I know a lot of what I'm saying seems like I'm anti-drafting table. I'm really not. What I am is anti bad work, right? Regardless, I think both could actually be used, and arguably I would encourage that you try to hybridize it. Try to make it this blend between both of them, and arguably those are the people who get hired first anyway because they're most flexible, right? And they start to understand not only the computer but also where it came from. Why do we even use it in a computer? Those kinds of questions. And those kinds of questions will get you hired. So there's nothing wrong with that either. But as you can see, arguably a lot more intuitive and a little bit easier, right? Of course, now I can go back in, change line weights, I can get a ground line going. Shoot, I mean, we could get it on the side of a hill if we really want to. There it is, side of the hill. Now I've got topography, just like that. Boop. And voila, right? So what I'm trying to say is just draw it, right? I mean, clearly here we'll draw it in Rhino, take it to Illustrator, and line weight it up. No big deal. Now, it is true, some of you guys realized in exercise 5 that you can do line weights in Rhino 8. But it's less intuitive. It doesn't actually show you what's actually changing, and that can be extremely confusing. You all right there, Raul? All right. But in our case, I'm not going to sit here and trace all of them because, well, I don't want to make this the longest video in the world. But as you can see, pretty generic, right? We got to start with layers, and we got to do almost exactly what we did in exercise 5. Draw the thing. We're either tracing it or drawing it, right? However, again, keep in mind that we can do it accurately and inaccurately, to say the very least. However, next, let's set up the 2-point perspective. So in my case, maybe I want a new layer. Maybe I want to call it bounding box. I don't know. I make new layers all the time just because, well, some of the time these layers kind of get in my way and I'll just delete them, right? So for instance, I do have actually a lot of layers in here because it's from a previous exercise. So I'll just delete them. Get out of here. Yes. Yeah, you too. Anyway, so you don't actually need all those. Anyway, I just didn't want to make it more confusing for some of you guys that are doing this for the first time. But keep in mind, we can double click and it enacts that new layer. So I don't know, let's go with magenta. Love magenta. And we'll set up our bounding. This is what I like to do for paper. I just make a box, right? I mean, more or less, that kind of signifies my paper. Now I've got my elevation or section to the side. And of course, what I need to start making my 2-point perspective. Now in my case, I need a couple other things. And I really am just going to do probably the bounding box for today, just to kind of get the point across. But you guys may have guessed it, we need all the same things that we had last time. We need a horizon line, which some of you guys are still struggling with. What is a horizon line? We need the perspective plane. And this is where it starts to get really interesting because now you can put it in the front, the middle, the side, the back. Accuracy is not of the question now. So, I mean, it's really up to you. But what doesn't change is, of course, the principles that we just use on our drafting table, which is what I'm trying to actually extenuate to this point, is that it really is all the same. The only thing that's changing, of course, is the tool itself. So in our case, maybe I want to rotate this a little bit. I don't know, maybe I want that view versus that view. And that's, of course, where you would decide, is, of course, the rotation of this image. If you wanted to dial it in perfectly, you could actually type in rotate, give it, I don't know, 3 degrees that way, right? So you can, of course, be accurate. Not that anyone has ever had to be truly that accurate, I don't think. But for our case, we'll get it close. Now, keep in mind, I'm doing this to the image. I should do it actually more to my trace, right? However, if I was maybe deciding not to trace and I'm just going to use it, well, I could just use it too. So there is that. But that'll be my perspective plane for today, so let's make that extra long. We've got our horizon, and we're ready to go. All right. First thing I want to do is set up a stationary point. So I'm going to literally just type in point, and I can put a point anywhere I want. I'm going to say that I'm standing right here, kind of far away from it, and maybe off a little to the side. It's going to be a weird drawing. Maybe I do line it up a little bit better than that. There we go. All right. First things first, I need my horizon point. So, all right, I'm going to make a line. I'm going to set my box or my offset to point. That way it locks onto my points. Sweet. I'm gonna make a really long line, that way I can just rotate it by 45 degrees. So I'll take this, boop, and go up 45 degrees. I don't necessarily have to do that again, so I'm just gonna mirror it. And if you guys remember the rule on our drafting table, we more or less want this to be kind of perpendicular to the side that we're using. I'm going for a 45, let's face it, that's probably not a perfect 45, but for the sake of tutorial, it's fine for today. In our case, I'll take another line. Wow, look at that, no intersection, until I get an intersection point. So that is what that INT stands for. I'm gonna turn some of these off again, so I don't confuse you too much today. We'll take out vertex. But yeah, immediately we get an intersection, and yes, if you zoom in, it really is that true intersection. We'll zoom out, and again, these are kind of just my construction lines, so I'm not really worried about, you know, how clean they are. You know, just trying to base it, get it onto the paper, if you will, maybe in a, you know, a nice, relatively symmetrical way. You saw it was kind of a little bit off, so I kind of moved it a little bit over here. That way we get that vanishing point left and vanishing point right. In fact, we could even put a point there, just in case, you know, we don't want to lose it. Spacebar, do it again. So now we got our points. Man, shoot, we could even label it. So I can say stationary point, sweet. Put my stationary point here. Make a copy. You say vanishing line 1 or vanishing point 2. All that kind of stuff. And boy, I wish I did this kind of stuff when I was a student. Nobody even told me. Nobody. Vanishing point 1 and vanishing point 2. Because I don't know, you might be teaching somebody else. You never know. But in my case, let's just go for it. So, draw a line from my stationary point. I'll hit a point, right? Now let's do that again. I'm gonna hit this one too. All right. That one's pretty easy because it's on the perspective plane. I'm just hitting spacebar, just for some of you guys. I'm just reenacting the exact same command of line. I don't know about you, but hitting spacebar is a little bit easier than twisting my pencil all the time and sharpening it. All right, not too shabby. Now some of these I may need to project. Oh wait, that one doesn't hit the perspective plane, and that one actually hits the perspective plane somewhere else. So I may need to extend it first. Extend. And of course press the line that I need to. Ah, there's the one that I need. And perfectly and accurately as well. Now I'll do it in a new layer. I'll do the actual box drawing, or the volume, that 30 by 30 by 50. Or did I do 60 for you guys? I thought I did 50. Was it 25 by 25? Sorry, I've got almost a nearly identical exercise in computer graphics, but I do give a little different dimensions. 25 by 25, that sounds about right, by 50. So we'll do that. Oh yeah. So let's make it to where you guys can see it. We'll say volume, no big deal. I don't know, we'll go with blue. That's pretty easy to see. And we'll start drawing. Now keep in mind, those were just kind of points to have. They're my construction, right? Now I actually want to do the drawing. There's that point I need. Sweet. That's the front point. Got that back point. Oh, there's the intersection. Man, look how easy it was to find that intersection. And there we go. All right. And again, I'm just holding shift to maintain a straight line. Some of you guys, if you notice, if you have ortho on, it'll automatically be straight no matter what until I actually hold shift, and it'll actually do the opposite. Again, some of these things I don't know if I call them out, but I do want to make sure that I do, just because it can be a little confusing. The next thing I should have done was actually line up both of these drawings. So we'll get out of here. We'll hide them. We can show them back, but you know, we'll hide them. But in our case, we'll hide that one as well. I don't just want to maybe stick to my lines, but I do need to decide where the ground plane is, right? So for instance, you guys knew that all too well when we were drawing our 2-point perspectives. You gotta have a top and a bottom, right? Which is why we do that side view. Because it is the only true dimension, right? So we can almost imagine that wherever this perspective plane is, that is where this dimension will be true. So again, the same exact rules that we just had, right, for exercise 5, 4, with the 2-point perspective. So, even better, we'll take another line. In my case, I need to make sure which one's the front line. So, okay, just retrace my steps. That was the front line. All right. Sweet. So I'll take that intersection and bring it back to my vanishing point. Sweet. Now I got the wrong one. Oh no, what do I do? Start over? Nah, just go right there. Now I have my orthogonal mode on, so let me take that off. I'll get rid of the one I don't need. In my case, I'll take that one back as well. Back as well. And as you can see, we're starting to get a 2-point perspective. You guys see it? Let's keep going, because I can take now that intersection, bring it back, that intersection and bring it back. Now I got my bottom plane. Oh, and look at that, almost. So I hate to say it, but Ethan, you're drawing slightly off. That's okay, it's not that badly off, right? Not too shabby. But it will start to mess with things. It could also be my rotation as well, so there is that. Plus, it doesn't exactly, yeah, I'd actually probably say it's much more likely our rotation, because one point is actually hitting where the other point I should be actually, well, it is projecting a little bit. I don't know, that's a good question actually. I wouldn't be surprised it's actually our rotation. But in our case, let's keep going. Take that back, and take that intersection back. And we start to get our piece, right? If you just absolutely couldn't see it though, again, this is why I can't stress layers. So overall volume. And again, you'd be surprised how many layers we just come up with, like just on the fly. But I may want to eventually bulk that up anyway. Maybe I make my blue lines construction lines, and that's okay too. Oh, and maybe I should do it on the right layer. There we go. Keep in mind you can always switch these layers no matter what line. You can do this while you're drawing or even after, but arguably let's make some good habits. Do it while you draw it so you don't have to forget. But for instance, we got it right there. And I could just use it. Sweet. The next thing I could do is of course each and every single level, right? So I can get this one, drag it across, and remember it's only going to be true, right, at this point. So I could even leave it there. I don't want to sit there and do that all day, so I'll just copy this line and do this all day, especially if I wanted to get all those points. Maybe all the bottom levels first. And now I can start to decide those things, right? Where they are in space, where they're going to, and which direction. Okay. Obviously in this case, what's kind of nice is I can even go from a single point knowing where it's essentially going to come out. Now I can't just draw a line and go, well, if that's 6 feet, that should be 6 feet. That's just not going to work, just like the drafting table. It just won't work. But what is nice, I do have the vanishing point angle going. I do have this point and this line going. So I could actually extend it. Extend. And of course continue. Now that would be the true level that it is, right? I could do the same thing. Vanishing point to my line and extend. Again, I wish that was a feature on a drafting table that I could just type extend, because it would be entirely helpful. Just like that. You guys see where I'm going with this? Yeah.
For the top view picture, does it have to be angled like that, or can we just have it like straight up?
It can't be straight up and down, because then you won't get a vanishing point. It does have to be angled in some way. I'm suggesting 45-45, but it doesn't actually have to be 45-45. In fact, it just needs a slight angle, right? I mean, even that, what it is you're going to have one vanishing point that's very close to the object and one that's like infinitely distant. It's just not going to look, it's going to look weird. You're going to have one face that's just like how do I draw that, right? And it's just a little easier if you're looking at it catty corner, right? It's a good question, but yeah, whatever you do, do not do it straight face on. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of overlapping lines that you're just like, what do I do with that? Well, you're looking at a face that you just can't see, right? You're going to start to see some anomalies that, for instance, trying to draw this face, you just won't see it. Whereas, well, in this case right now you will, right? It's a slight angle, right? And it's going to be heavily confusing. I would either turn it 45-45 or arguably even a 60-30 would be okay, right? It's going to be a little bit more dramatic, but, you know, not impossible to draw. So there is that. But I would say that's definitely enough to get started. As you can imagine, that's really the hardest drawing of this entire piece. As you can imagine, just, well, tracing something isn't exactly difficult. Line weighting it, you already know how to do that in exercise 5 alone. But I would say, especially since I've done this many times in the past, this is probably the hardest drawing that some students still struggle with. However, the ones that get it on the drafting table seem to get it just fine, right? So I don't think it's actually a computer issue. I think it's just the material itself. Drawing a 2-point perspective is, well, let's face it, you've probably never been asked to do that besides this class, ever, right? Maybe freehand 1, maybe freehand 2, but again, maybe not in such a technical way. It's more of a guideline. It's maybe even connecting it to reality. I don't know about you, but the last time I've walked down a hallway, I've never just like traced the lines and been like, is that exactly right? Right? It's not something that we normally do, right? However, what is, I think, pretty interesting is that this is how architects used to be the best, right? In fact, we'd have to design and draw a situation that just doesn't exist yet, right? So don't get me wrong, these skills are fantastic to have. Does the computer now do a lot of these skills for us? Well, yes. And you'll learn that, of course, in computer graphics if you have myself, Professor Tunks, or Professor Amin for graphics, right? However, for some of us, you could also realize that we're in 2026 now, and there are things like this where if we simply type in box, we can get a box. I can switch it to 2-point perspective and get a 2-point perspective. Or we can get that drama that we're going for. There we go. There's some drama. Sweet. I could take this and of course type in make 2D. Press apply. And it's actually going to make 2D for me. So don't get me wrong, eventually there's something to look forward to. But arguably there's something to be said about doing this still, I almost want to say it's analog, right? Because we're actually doing the same methodology of the drafting table. Which is why if you absolutely have to skip, because let's face it, computer graphics is technically an elective course and it's not usually funded by, you know, your regular field of study degree. So very often a lot of students go, I don't need it. I'll take freehand 1 and freehand 2. I'm going to do great at the next school. That's probably true. However, you'll be immediately met with a computer, right? You'll be required to use this computer, right? In fact, like I've expressed before, I had my drawings ripped right off the wall, right? And I'm pretty good at drafting, right? Even back then. However, it is a true thing of our paradigm, of architecture. We work mainly in digital. However, I wouldn't be surprised in the next 20 to 25 years, especially with iPads, Wacom tablets, and the way that people are starting to love drawing again, that it comes back full circle, right? So instead of drawing with mice like we have since 1992, which is god-awful, by the way, we're actually going back to using our freehand skills, something that we learned and trained our hands and our mind connection, and that takes some good time. I mean, especially for those of you in freehand 1 and 2, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your first lines weren't great, but your last ones were shaky and beautiful, right? But you knew you had to do that shaky, beautiful line in order to make it, right? Or there's that one Escamilla Ryzen does where you have to do straight lines, right? You have to do horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, right? And you had to fill 4 quadrants. It's one of the first assignments that we give in freehand 1. But arguably, let's face it, something like that is super easy for the computer because it's just completely different. However, it's a good question, and I see some of you guys already tracing along and getting started, so wonderful to see. Any major questions about pretty much the setup? So just a recap, we went over tracing the drawing, getting some images in here. So let me show all my images. We got some of those in, we rotated them up, cleaned them up a little bit, and got them orthogonal. We scaled them so that it was the correct units. We started tracing it and going over basically the wonderful ability that we have, especially when we're repeating elements. And in fact, I had this one professor one time tell me that actually a computer, the only thing it's really good at is copying code, right? It's able to copy, it's to produce itself multiple and faster than what we can do as humans, and arguably that's true. But can it think is kind of hard to say. But just to recap, we went over the setup of the 2-point perspective, setting up our drawings, and whether we have to trace or set up those drawings. And then of course getting started by framing out the 2-point perspective box, right? So it is true, you only have to do one side of your observation tower. So I don't know, I'd pick probably the best side. And for some of us who maybe even want to show kind of the inside of what's happening, I'm thinking a little bit of Jasmine's where she does have this exterior shell. It would be nice to maybe start to open that in maybe a unique way, or maybe give us a hidden line situation of what's going on inside, since you do have those things. So I'll leave that entirely up to you. But as you can imagine, we have really the rest of not only this class, but this week, and of course next week to of course work in the computer lab and finish up the drawings. Now, this is just part 1 of part 3. I am going to do a part 2 and start to show you how to compose it, things like that. And I still have a final requirements. It's called part 4, but I just call it final requirements. So hopefully I'll give that to you either this week Thursday or next week Monday. I don't know. I don't want to scare you away. So, but it'll go over basically that final composition. So it'll go a lot with part 2 of part 3. Yes, Regan.
It says all floor plans. Is that every level or just the bottom and top again?
So the top one isn't actually a floor plan. It's more like a roof plan. But it was necessary in order for us to get started. Like, what does the top look like? And I didn't want to call it a roof plan because when I do, everybody starts to make a roof for some reason. To answer your question, we need one at the bottom, one in the middle, and one at the top, right? So if you take a look at our view right here, I could do one right here, one right there, and one right there. Right? Maybe I want this one instead. That's totally fine. But we need at least 3. Most of us probably have 3. Arguably, maybe even more. Good question. Any others, guys?
I have one, but
What do you got, Gab?
it's more about mine.
Oh, are you modeling it out?
Well, I already have it modeled out.
Good.
Just, I guess, setting that up into the 2-point perspective. Is that kind of like the same thing?
Yeah, so it's a little more advanced, but I can walk you through it. I'm not going to do it on this video, but
For sure.
absolutely. Yes, Jasmine?
Do we need to do shade and shadow?
No. Don't have to.
Thank you.
It's just kind of ridiculous, and to be fair, the computer is going to do that modeling wise anyway. You'll never be actually asked to do that. So don't get me wrong, it makes sense to do it for an axon because it's a parallel orthogonal view, and that's a little easier. Whereas in a 2-point perspective, it really does now go to a vanishing point that don't get me wrong, to explain it, you basically take the vanishing point of one of these two, you lift it up, and this becomes your sun. So essentially everything like hits a certain point. Don't get me wrong, we could do it, but it's I'd say even more advanced than graphics 2 of your freshman year of studio. You wouldn't even be asked to do something like that, even in the past, until like 4th year studio, Is it more difficult? Yeah. Is it required for this project? No. Will I give you extra credit for it? Hell yeah. So there is that. Also keep in mind though, I could do something like this. I could figure out what my 2-point perspective looks like. I could sit here and go into Ritter mode and I could calculate my shadow. And then I could type in sun and be like, what is it going to look like if it's actually over here? What if it's actually sundown and it's facing this angle? What if it's really sundown? As you can imagine, it starts to get all yellowy on us and everything. So don't get me wrong, we eventually get really hyper technical about it and shade and shadow, but we're never gonna draw shade and shadow again after this class, let's face it. Probably shouldn't have said that for the recording. Disregard that. Helpful? Any other questions, guys? Great questions, by the way. All right, we'll leave it there for today.